From Canada, Citizens Forum, where we look at the important issues of the day through a lens of democracy and media and try to figure out, how do we build a better country for ourselves? Hello, everybody. Welcome to From Canada Citizens Forum. My name is Jack Etkin. It is Saturday, September the 27th, 2025. My guest is Yves Engler. Yves is running for the leadership of the federal NDP. The race is beginning now, and I think a leader will be chosen at a NDP convention in Winnipeg towards the end of March. Is that correct, Yves?
Yes, but the voting will be online beforehand.
Okay. Maybe you can just give us a brief description of yourself and how you got involved in this, and then we'll talk about some of the issues.
Yeah, my name is Yves Engler. I've been an author and activist for the past 25 years, mostly here in Montreal, Jojage. I grew up in Vancouver, but came out east to go to university. And I was asked by the Socialist Caucus of the NDP if I was interested in running, which I initially was. It wasn't on my radar at all, and I initially said probably not, and then was pressed on the matter. And I'm basically running on a anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, pro-economic democracy, pro-degrowth and decolonization platform, with obviously the intent of using the leadership race and becoming, if I was to win, using the party to be a tool of social movements trying to fundamentally change the deeply inegalitarian and ecologically damaging policy that dominates today.
So I would say you're not a centralist within the NDP. You're what I would call on the left wing of the party.
Oh, for sure. I think that in the past 2 months of campaigning, we've raised questioning capitalism more than the NDP, all of the NDP brass and infrastructure over the past maybe, 5 years. So definitely we are pushing the debate to a more honest assessment of the fundamental injustices within our society. And definitely I would be on the left of the party.
Are you a longtime member of the party, or did you just recently join?
I recently rejoined. I became a member in 2017 to vote in the leadership race. And I became a member, I believe, also in 2002, 2003 to vote in an earlier leadership race. I voted for the NDP in a number of elections, but I've also been very critical of the NDP. I wrote a whole book that was in part a criticism of NDP CCF foreign policy. And I've written many articles, of course, critical of different NDP policies, particularly around the alignment with Canada's pro-U.S. empire foreign policy.
And you were nominated, I think, by the Socialist Caucus of the NDP. And I know a little bit about that group. And I mean, they are long-time members, people who have devoted years to the party. So, I mean, you have the support from a quite committed NDP group.
Yeah, I believe the Socialist Caucus has been around since the late 80s. So it's 30 plus years. And they are, critical of lots of NDP decisions. They've had some successes over the years in winning sort of more left-wing resolutions, passing on, I think, Afghanistan, minimum wage, things like that over the years. But it's a group that I think that the party hierarchy is not particularly fond of, because it is a group that is very critical of the more sort of establishment orientation within the party.
So you would like to see the NDP move to the left. I would certainly like to see that myself.
I would like to see the NDP do what's necessary to eliminate billionaires, to eliminate 100 millionaires. I would like to see the NDP push to shut down the tar sands. I would like to see the NDP push to turn the real estate investment trusts that are a mid-90s creation of the tax code to subsidize wealthy people getting involved in real estate, which has led to greater eviction rates, greater rental increases. Turn those into co-ops. That's what we're calling for. Turn 200,000 units of real estate investment trusts into co-ops. Fundamentally challenge the housing crisis. And it's a crisis. 100,000 people in abject misery on the streets, unhoused, many millions more in very precarious circumstances. And it requires bold solutions. We've called for declaring a national emergency on housing and using the greater powers to turn these real estate investment trusts into co-ops, and also, more generally, the other corporate landowners. So we are pushing the party to go back to its roots. If you look back at the Regina Manifesto in the early 1930s, it called for eradicating capitalism. If you look at the Waffle Manifesto in the early 1970s, it also called for challenging capitalism. So, we have these billionaires, we have this concentration of wealth that is absolutely obscene. It's immoral. It is a huge threat to democracy. They dominate the media, they dominate the think tanks, the universities, the different business associations, and it has a profoundly negative impact on democracy. So we're calling for the expansion of democracy from the political arena into the economic arena. Instead of the capitalism's $1, one vote, we're pushing for one person, one vote, economic democracy.
Regarding the housing issue, which you talked about a little bit, here in Victoria, it's a disaster. And I know there are solutions. I mean, we have so much empty space here in Victoria, right next to the downtown, covered in automobile dealerships, car dealerships with huge parking lots. I mean, it's just crazy. And they won't build on that. It remains parking lots and vacant lots. But what's it like in Montreal with the housing situation and with the cost of living in general? How are people doing there?
I don't think the housing situation is quite as bad as in Victoria and Vancouver, but there's, I'm not sure the exact number, but a couple thousand people who are unhoused, who are living on the streets. There's encampment towards one of the sort of major roads on the eastern side of the city, the big encampment, kind of a little bit isolated from the city. And there has been lots of, crackdowns on these homeless encampments. I was just in Victoria, and my friend lives on Pandora Street, so I, walked. He lives about 6-8 blocks off of downtown, so I walked along where there is clearly, it's a serious crisis, and I completely agree that I have written about. Over the years, that we should take land that's public land currently devoted to the private automobile, and we should turn that into social housing, co-op housing. We need to invest. We need to be building, at least 100,000 units of social or co-op housing across the country every single year, and put tens of billions of dollars into it. Mark Carney, 10 days ago, he announced a big housing plan, and there was $1 billion for homelessness in this plan. That's equivalent to 1/8 of what they're spending on these surface combatant naval vessels that will have Tomahawk missiles that can be launched 1,500 kilometers. The surface combatants are around 7.5 billion per. They're planning on purchasing 15 of these surface combatants. So $1 billion to deal with this crisis of homelessness, and 105 billion for surface combatant naval vessels. Another 120 billion for submarines. Then we have the F-35 fighter jets. So the priorities are completely backwards. We have a serious issue with housing. I spoke in Oslo in May, and I had the opportunity over a very short period to had a layover for much of a day in Zurich. And then I was in Oslo for a day and a half. I went to Gothenburg in Sweden and Copenhagen for about a day each. And there was almost no homeless people in those cities. You saw almost basically none. And every single city in Canada, it is a serious problem. And we need to address that. And I saw the province newspaper had a story when I was there on the ferry 3 or 4 days ago, and they talked about they did a study of people on the street in Vancouver, which had gone up quite a bit in the last couple of years, and they said half of the people cited inability to pay rent as the reason why they had been driven onto the street. Others had, issues with violence, with spousal violence or violence where they were at. Others were, substance abuse and stuff like that. But the main issue, the number one issue, was inability to pay. And so that makes sense. It is in part a culmination of the fact that the federal government ended its substantive investment in housing back in the 90s, and it's catching up to us. So we need to build we don't need more, single family houses on the exurban fringes where you need a private automobile to get to. We don't need more, wealthy condos. What we need is large numbers, tens of billions of dollars need to be spent on building social housing, co-op housing that is genuinely affordable, not just affordable, not 80% of the market rate or these different formulas that they come up with for affordable, which means it's going to be $2,000 instead of $2,500 for a one bedroom. That is not, if you make minimum wage, or if you're even worse off than the minimum wage, you simply can't afford that. So we have to build that. It ultimately is it's better for everyone. It's not just dealing with the misery that people who are in the streets are facing and that, but it's also just, it's inefficient and has all kinds of downsides, social downsides to have so many people on the streets like that. But there's no real will to confront the logic of everything it's only viable if capitalists can make money from it. We'll only build what capitalists can make money from. That's not the logic that we need to be following.
Yeah, I would agree that Canada's entire housing policy seems to be how to make the most money for the banks and the big developers and the landowners. And good housing for Canadians doesn't even seem to show up on the list.
For sure. I mean, and when Mark Carney makes his big announcements, and this is huge, much touted housing policy, and the total was $13 billion. And I should say that's over an undetermined number of years, maybe as long as a decade. But that was for a whole bunch of different initiatives. And at the most vulnerable, only $1 billion for homelessness is just it's a slap in the face. It's there has to be a commitment. First of all, the government has said housing is a right. They have said that, so they ostensibly believe that. Well, we have to make that true in practice. And I'm also somebody who is very critical of cityscapes being structured around the private automobile. So I have a fair bit of sympathy for the notion of densification, certainly around downtown cores, and more generally. So I'm not a fan at all of the building of private homes on the suburban fringes, auto-oriented. And I think there are a lot of people on the left who focus a bit too much of their criticism on condos and ignore the building of these houses at the exurban fringes. But there is a important criticism of the fact that the city governments have been captured by these so-called, real estate, developers. Really, what they are is, capitalist property owners, right? That want to make more money by selling high-end condos and stuff like that. So it's to be fair to the federal government. It's not just it's all across from the municipal governments to the provincial level to the federal level. The capitalists have sort of taken control of housing policy, but an important part of this is going backwards in time, where after World War II, a significant proportion of the new houses that were being built were being financed by the federal government. That continued on into the 1990s, and it needs to, we need to return to that, and we need to put that investment. We have to say that the quote unquote market is not the solution. There may be a role for the market in certain parts of housing, but that should be a much diminished role. And when we talk about the market, that's the thing about these real estate investment trusts. They act kind of more increasingly as oligopolies, where they basically corner much of the rental market and end up with immense power, and then have much higher eviction rates, and then also have much higher rental increase rates. So we need to go directly at these questions. We don't need just some tweaks around the edges. We need to confront the power of the corporate landlords, and we need to confront the logic of neoliberalism that says that the government doesn't have a central role in financing and building social and co-op housing.
So you think the federal government should have a central role in doing that? Yes.
It should immediately set up targets of minimum 100,000 new units per year of social and co-op housing.
Okay. So I like a lot of the stuff you're talking about. You're running for the leadership of the federal NDP. Do you think the party leadership is going to let you into the race?
If I were in Vegas and I were betting, I would say no. I think that's where the good money would be on that proposition.
And that is a real problem, because it happened in the Green Party as well a few years ago. Exactly the same thing. Someone with ideas similar to yourself was kicked out of the federal Green Party leadership race and only got back in when he threatened legal action. Are you prepared to do something like that?
Yeah, well, there's not just one example in the federal Green. Dimitri Lascaris was blocked, and then he was able to get back in the race. But then in the more recent election, Alex Terrell, the leader of the Green Party Quebec, was blocked from running. So, and of course, in BC NDP, you had they sort of changed the rules part of the way through the race to block a more eco-socialist minded individual from running. So
yes, a young woman by the name of Anjali Appadurai was running against David Eby, and she was going to beat him. we were going to have a climate change activist as the premier of British Columbia. And the NDP kicked her out of the race with, I may say, the full support of the corporate media.
Yeah, and so this is a central issue. There is a vetting process that gives the party leadership immense amount of control over who can run in the race. And so what my campaign has been doing is we understand that there's, right away when we announced, there's all these genocide advocate groups and right-wing media who are saying Yves can't be allowed to be part of this race. The NDP needs to block him. And we understand there's also people within the NDP brass that don't want these ideas part of the race and feel very threatened by our campaign. So what we have done is we have tried to build momentum to make it more difficult for them to block us we fulfilled the nomination signatures requirement. Is 500 members representing a variety of regional equity and age requirements. We've more than surpassed that. We're like 1,100 nominations. We've also, they brought in a payment. You have to pay $100,000 to be part of the race. You have to pay the party. And that's designed in partly it's because the party's bankrupt, but partly it's because they want to restrict the sort of left insurgent campaigns. Well, we've raised over $75,000 in just over 2 weeks of fundraising, and so we are basically in this nomination package that they created. We are doing step 2 and step 3. Step 2 is the signatures of members. And step 3 is the first installment of $25,000. Then you got to give a second installment of $25,000 very soon after that to participate in the leadership debates. So we've done step 2 and step 3, and we haven't done step 1, which is the vetting, because we want to create both the impression and the sort of momentum of the campaign to make it more difficult for them to block us. We also have a number of lawyers, including Dimitri Lascaris, who was able to have the Greens change their decision, that are part of a legal committee that is prepared to respond legally if the NDP blocks us from participating. So I don't know. I mean, there's lots of reasons for the NDP to have us in the race. They would get $100,000 minimum. Realistically, they'd probably get another 100,000 because they take 25% of whatever you raise above 100,000. Plus, if we run, there'll be new members that would join. Plus, I think our participation in the race would probably lead to more donations to some of the other candidates. So I think the party would probably, we're talking about $150,000 they'd get, or they would lose if they block us from running. But nonetheless, we know that there's lots of pressure from different groups, particularly those who promote Israel's crimes, to block us from the race.
Can we talk for a minute or two about, I think, an issue that's very central to you, and I guess is central to your campaign, and that's what's going on with Israel and Gaza and Palestine. Am I correct in saying that's been a central part of your focus, and I guess in the race as well?
Well, it's certainly a central reason for people supporting me. People know that I have been a leading advocate to ending Canadian complicity in Israel's apartheid and genocide. You know, going back 20 years, I wrote a book in 2010 titled "Canada and Israel Built Apartheid." I was thrown out of university. I was in the Concordia Student Union in 2002 when Benjamin Netanyahu came to speak or tried to speak at university. I was a vice president of the Student Union. And in the aftermath of that, I was expelled from university for things related to the Netanyahu and other political activism. It's an issue that I've been working on for more than 20 years. So people know that it's not this is genuine, and I confront power on this issue, and it's important. We have put forward in terms of specifics on Canada's position. If Canada just upheld its existing laws vis-a-vis Israel, that would go a significant way in delivering a message to the Israeli government and Israeli society more generally, and it would go a significant way to ending Canadian complicity. That means specifically when it comes to the Export-Import Act, it says very clearly that it's illegal to sell weapons to countries that are engaged in massive human rights violations. Canada continues to provide Israel with bullets, artillery propellant. As late as April, we have proof of that. The Canada Revenue Agency says it's contrary to their rules for registered charities subsidized by all taxpayers to support foreign militaries, to support West Bank settlements, to support municipalities, racist organizations. Dozens of Canadian organizations, charities, support the Israeli military, racist organizations, municipalities, or West Bank settlements. The CRA doesn't act. The most egregious example is the Hessig Foundation for Lone Soldiers, that's set up by Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz, the head of Onyx and Indigo. And they have sent $200 million to the Hessig Foundation that supports non-Israelis joining the Israeli military, Montrealers, Torontonians, Parisians, Londoners, joining the Israeli military. Also, so the CRA needs to uphold its rules with registered charities. Also, the Foreign Enlistment Act. It's illegal to induce Canadians to join a foreign military. There's a school in Toronto, private Jewish school, where a quarter of the graduates are joining the Israeli military. That school is, of course, inducing Canadians to join the Israeli military. The War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act. There are dozens, almost certainly 100 plus Canadians who fought in Gaza. There are also many Israelis who've come to Canada who fought in Gaza. We should be prosecuting them, Canadians and Israelis in Canada, under the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act, or at minimum investigating them. But that requires the Attorney General's sign-off. So just upholding Canadian law would go a significant way in delivering a message and lessening Canadian complicity. But they refuse to do that. And they continue to treat Israel as a unique country that gets special treatment, and it has to stop. So we've put forward very detailed, this is obviously an issue that I know the details of Canada's involvement with Israel. I know it well. We've put forward very detailed proposal on this, and we've been campaigning. One of our strategies, outreach strategies, is a Palestine strategy of getting people at Palestine demonstrations to be signed up and volunteer for the campaign, and we've also used this as an opportunity to educate many who still don't know the details of the scope of Canada's complicity in Israel's live-streamed Holocaust in Gaza.
I'm sure you've been called anti-Semitic because of this, because it's almost illegal to criticize Israel, which is an absurd situation.
No doubt, I've been smeared as an anti-Semite going back 20 years. This comes with the territory. Fortunately, what we've seen is the smears have lost some of their currency, particularly on the left, because they've been thrown everywhere, and it's becoming increasingly clear to people that this is just the ideological stick that the genocide lobby uses to justify the endless horrors that we see come out of Gaza every day.
Can I ask you a few specific questions about things here in Canada? The dental care program, which I think was the Canada Dental Care Program, which I think was brought about largely because of the NDP forcing the Liberals to do it. What's your opinion of that particular program?
I think it's good. I'd move towards a complete universal dental program, make it much closer to just part of the Medicare, and basically have it universal. Here in Quebec, under the age of 12, it's covered by the government. I think that we should go in that direction of just the universalized dental care.
On environmental issues, you mentioned you'd like to see the closure of the tar sands in Alberta, which I would also like to see. Alberta has set records over the last 5 years, I think. Each year they've shipped more oil out of Alberta than the previous year, even though we're told that the federal government is cramping Alberta's style. The fact is that every year for the last 5 years, Alberta has set a new record for oil production. But employment is down because the oil companies, although they're making record profits, are still reducing employment. So if the oil sands or tar sands were closed down in Alberta, what about the thousands of people who work there? How does the nation provide good jobs for those people, or do you have an idea about that?
Yeah, the first thing we have to start off from the premise that for a mix of ecological and justice reasons, the tar sands need to be shut down. And I say that they obviously the very high oil, basically across the board, needs to stay in the ground. The tar sands are particularly high emitting, greenhouse gas emitting. Also, Canada is a wealthy nation that has one of the highest greenhouse gas emission per capita historically and currently. So for all those reasons, you wouldn't say, okay, well, the oil in the Congo or the oil in Guatemala needs to be the first that stays in the ground. Of course, it's the wealthier country that has emitted more historically, taken up more of its carbon budget, if you want to frame it like that. So they need to be shut down. Now, then the question is how do we do that in terms of making it done in a just way? I'm not concerned about the profits of the corporations. We are concerned about those working in the bitumen fields, but as you point out, it is the numbers are fewer and fewer. It is very capital intensive, but we do have to. If the government is going to impose the shutdown of the tar sands, there has to be employment retraining for those working, and on conditions and pay scale that is comparable to current, which is in lots of cases fairly high. So there needs to be that investment. There needs to be that commitment. The mechanics of that, is that building light rail in Edmonton and Victoria and in Medicine Hat and Lethbridge? Is that building tens of thousands of units of co-op and social housing? Is that something in building wind power? That I think is up for proper discussion and debate, and there's all kinds of technical questions there. But the basic commitment is there has to be a just transition for the workforce, not for the companies, but for the workforce. There has to be a equal, comparable employment in another sector.
You've been on a tour of, I think, Western Canada for the past few days. Maybe you can just say a few words about how that's going.
Yeah, I just concluded we started off in Toronto, then we had Brampton, Waterloo, Niagara, 3 different Vancouver, Coquitlam, Surrey speaking things, then in Nanaimo, Duncan, Victoria, Burnaby, Regina, and Winnipeg. And it was good. It was about 1,000 people. showed up, a whole bunch of different type of events.
You mean 1,000 people per event?
No, 1,000 people total, but 1,000 people total showed up, and there was a whole bunch of different events. From rallies for Palestine to just standard launch, speaking engagements, which I've been doing for many years, to a mosque in Brampton, and there's lots of positive response. There were two of the events were canceled. In Toronto at the Anglican Church, right. The Zionist forces were able to have the Anglican Church cancel the event 3 days before, after thousands of leaflets and posters had circulated. And we just held it outside. We held it on the steps of the church. The Jewish Defense League's hardline Zionists, about 6 or 8 of them showed up and tried to heckle us. About 120 to 150 supporters showed up, and it was a very boisterous. It was one of the more, maybe the most electrifying speaking event that I've ever been part of, outside of like a demonstration, I think, probably. So it was quite successful, pushed back to this effort to shut down. The next night in Waterloo at the Wilfrid Laurier University, I was speaking about Canada genocide with a retired prof, Peter Eglund from WLU. And the day before, they all of a sudden said they had to postpone the event because of unidentified security reasons. And we took the space that was right outside where the room was. About 50 people showed up, ended up being a much better event. In both cases, we did these action alerts where we got thousands of people to email the church, then the university complaining. We use these things to fundraise. So there was lots of support. People have had enough of it. People have had enough of authoritarian Zionism, and they want to give, they want to donate, they want to show that if there is an effort to shut down, that it will boost whoever is being shut down, that it will build the campaign more, that it will people donate, people will write emails, people will come out, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a good start to the tour. After that, things calmed down in terms of the more exciting elements, but we had good talks in pretty much everywhere, and it's building. We have about 1,000 volunteers working on campaign. I would say 1,000 are registered to volunteer. Hundreds are working actively. Dozens are working they put in like hundreds of hours already. We have materials. We've been circulating all kinds of different ideas, challenges, messages that I would say are outside of what we get in not only the NDP, but even most of the left, right? Even a lot of the environmental groups who are very hesitant to talk about, they won't raise degrowth. Well, I've been talking about degrowth. I believe that we have to be honest about it. We're consuming far too many resources as a society, and particularly Canada. Obviously, it's the billionaires that consume the most, and the private yachts and the private planes and the like. But collectively, there's too much consumption, and capitalism its logic is constant growth, constant profit maximization, and we have to be clear that we need to move beyond the logic of capitalism. We need to build economic democracy. We need to build an eco-socialism where it's community cooperative ownership in workplaces that are already engaged in social labor. There needs to be workplace democracy, and there needs to be environmental sustainability at the heart of all of our decisions made in the productive realm. We need to drastically reduce advertising. We need to constrain corporations' ability to pollute our mental sphere and the brains with constant messages about buy this, buy that. So we are raising ideas that aren't being raised in many major forums. The dominant media is mostly ignoring us. They smear us every so often. National Post has done a couple, smear hit pieces. For the most part, they just ignore our campaign. But we've been able to break through a little bit,
and it's been a good tour. It was long, it was arduous on a personal level, but it's very invigorating to see how much support there is and how much desire there is to confront power, to fundamentally transform Canada and Canada's place in this very unjust world.
Yves, thank you very much for doing this interview. Is there one other issue you'd like to bring up or talk about that's important to you in your campaign?
The other issue that's motivated me to run is this radical militarist turn that we've seen from Mark Carney. I mentioned it briefly, but the amount of money that is being put into militarism, Carney added $9 billion in June and then committed to the military budget this year, which has already doubled over the past decade, and then committed to 5% of GDP at the NATO summit that Trump was pushing for this huge increase in military spending. That would be about $100 billion in added military spending.
Yes, $100 billion annually
forever. On top of we're at about 50 to 60 billion, depending exactly how you quantify these things.
And that could be the money that's used to build the housing that we need.
Of course. And so that it's a huge threat to our social programs. And it gives the people who've been backing this live stream Holocaust in Gaza greater means to intimidate and wage violence internationally. So it is something that needs to be resisted. We have started to see some of this. The Draw the Line protests a week ago, they did bring militarism or anti-militarism into the equation. The NDP has, for the most part, gone along with militarism, gone along with the U.S. empire view of the world. And there's starting to be some signs of going in a different direction because it's such a huge increase in military spending. So I've put that right at the center of my campaign. I've written my second to last book was the history of the Canadian military. So I understand how this is really a tool of U.S. empire power projection. The Canadian military is not structured to defend us; it's structured to advance the U.S. empire, and we shouldn't be slashing social programs to devote more resources to the military machine. And that's an important part of my campaign and why I'm running.
And it's worth noting that the Canada's corporate-owned media, which I'm sad to say includes the CBC, seem to be 100% in full support of, yes, more for the military, but we just don't have enough money for housing. There's one more thing. The entire reason, I think, or a big part of the reason for the increased military spending is to defend ourselves against this attack by Russia on Europe and ourselves, and because of what's happening in Ukraine. And yet, if you look at, there are thousands of experts who say that the story we're being told about Ukraine in our media and by our politicians is not the real story. There is another story out there, and that story is that behind the war in Ukraine is the United States, which did many things to start that war. Would you agree with that perspective?
I would agree with that perspective, and I've written lots about this. Canada played an important role in NATO expansion eastward, despite the promises at the end of the Cold War. Canada pushed NATO expansion aggressively. Canada played an important role in trying to turn the Ukraine into a cudgel to weaken Russia. Specifically, 2014, the Canadian embassy in Kyiv was used as a base during the Maidan protests by including the C-14, a far-right group, that ultimately overthrows the elected president. That unleashes the seizure of Crimea. That leads to a civil war, sort of low-level proxy, Russia-NATO proxy war in the east of the country. And then that is the basis of what Russia massively expands. In January of 2022, when Russian troops were on the border, Melanie Joly went to Kyiv and said, we want Ukraine to join NATO, when they knew that that was an essential issue in the negotiations. And so Canada has played a very important role in provoking it. That's not a justification for what Russia's done. It's contrary to international law and it's brutal. But this is a provoked war. It is absolutely provoked, and Canada played a very important role in this. And I've detailed this out. It's well established. Even Jean Chrétien in June, when he spoke at the G8 or the G7 summit in Calgary, he said very clearly, he spent an hour and a half discussing the issues with Putin, and NATO expansion was a central part of it. This is not controversial. This is understood by experts. It is outside of the bounds of the propaganda system, but it is simple fact. And so NATO has provoked, has contributed to unleashing this war, which it then uses to justify more military spending, more belligerence, and we have to start by, there's no easy out now. It's a bad situation. There's no easy out. But we have to start as Canadians by recognizing our country's role in the belligerence as a way of pushing in the direction of diplomacy and a way of moving away from what has essentially been NATO's position, which is fight to the last Ukrainian. And increasingly, this is turning into a complete disaster for Ukrainians. They're losing, and they're losing incredible number of people. And it's, like I said, I don't see an easy out now.
No,
but
it's a nightmare.
You don't just double down. If you're in a hole, you don't just keep digging, right? And so there needs to be a recognition of the trajectory, and so when we talk about increased military spending on the grounds of security threats, the security threats are the forest fires that drove hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. The security threat is the fact that there's always people on the edge of being on the street, and many who are on the street. That is a much bigger, these are much bigger security concerns for most Canadians. It's not about Russia or China or Iran invading. Unfortunately, the NDP has mostly gone along with Washington's worldview, trying to manufacture enemies as a way to justify belligerence and to justify greater contributions to the military-industrial complex. And I'm absolutely against that. I don't just oppose this, radical increase in military spending. We should be talking about, why isn't Canada spending like Mexico? Mexico spends around 0.7% of GDP on the military. Canada's at about 2%. There's many countries like Costa Rica, Panama, Iceland who don't have militaries. There is only one country that could invade Canada, and that is the US. Our military is not structured to defend ourselves from that country. It's structured to enhance that country's global domination. These ideas need to be part of an NDP leadership race.
Yes. Yves Engler, candidate for the leadership of the NDP. It should be a very interesting race. I hope the media starts to tell people what's going on with at least your campaign and the others. It should be great. Thank you very much, Yves.
Thanks for having me.